endure are not irrational departures from a rational system, but the converse. They are the rational outcomes of a basically amoral and irrational system. John Maynard Keynes, who was the great economist of liberal capitalism in the 1930s and 40s and such, he made this comment: "What an astonishing idea that the most wickedest of men doing the most wickedest of things," double superlative, bad grammar, he's being deliberate. I mean, he knew the King's English, he went to Eton and Cambridge and all that. He was just trying to be cute. Let me start all over. What an astonishing idea that the most wickedest of men doing the most wickedest of things will produce beneficial results. He was saying, how do you get beneficial results? Evil in, virtue out. Huh? And that's the invisible hand of Adam Smith. It's an amoral system, Keynes pointed out, and others have too. It's also an irrational system. Karl Marx said it was a ruthlessly rational system that demystified and shattered the Dark Ages. And capitalism was that. It was one of those forces that brought us secularization. It was one of those forces that brought us out of 1,000 years of darkness. Why or how, there are people who have speculated. There's Max Weber's very un-Marxist explanation, which was the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. But it was a progressive force in ways that you wouldn't even think of it being an economic force, where it invited secularization. It invited seafaring, exploration, astronomy so that you can make calculations on distances and travel, markets opening up, a secularization. Somebody develops a steam engine. I mean, this was very exciting. It was moving away from that world where if somebody sneezed, you thought they were possessed by a demon. In the capitalist era, when somebody sneezed, you said you might be catching a cold and put something around you. Or if a shutter opened or a door opened and the wind blew in, you didn't think it was demons. You said, the wind's blowing in because the shutter is open. Just close it. So there was this demystification of 1,000 years of what you had of hocus pocus, of a world ruled by spirits, in which the in the Middle Ages, one of the charges made by the church against the medical school in Paris, you know what it was? It was empiricism. That the Parisian doctors were guilty of empiricism, meaning they were looking at cadavers, at bodies. They had been known to open them up to see what the human body looked like so they could somehow maybe deal with it a little better. That was not what you did for 1,000 years. Those 1,000 years called the Dark Ages, where the church is given credit for keeping learning alive, you see, amidst all this savagery and darkness. In fact, the church was the perpetrator of that darkness. They burned every library in the pagan world. They burned the 25 splendid public libraries in ancient Rome. They destroyed the library, the greatest library in the world, in Alexandria. Libraries during the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, consisted of maybe 200 volumes instead of 250,000 volumes as in Rome. And they would all be patristic writings, church writings and such. So what was I saying about that? I don't know. I get carried away. These digressions come in. Anyway, capitalism was one of those progressive forces. One embodiment, I would think, one embodiment of the Enlightenment was contributed by the United States in the 18th century, when the U.S. had just been put together. And the embodiment was a man named Benjamin Franklin. I mean, Franklin, and if you read all the founding fathers, they're very conservative. They're very conservative, most of them, more so than Franklin. He was probably one of the lesser conservative. They were watching out for money and property. They were watching out for their slaves. They were watching out for their indentured servants not getting out of line. They were all that. But they also, when they got on the subject of religion, they were absolutely furious. I mean, you read John Adams, who says, this world would be such a better place if there were no religion existed anywhere in it, ever in its history. Religion, we don't want any priest-ridden. I mean, they said things about religion. So when I see these teabaggers coming along and say the founding fathers believe that there's a joining of church and state, it's absolutely not true. I mean, their comments were kinds of comments that you don't hear any politician dare to make today. Not at all. Well, where was I? Getting back to Keynes about this wicked stuff and about the irrationality of the system. Keynes further observed that crises and crash and recession and panic were not exceptional, but they were the common mode. In other words, the irrational components of the capitalist dynamic was the norm. And you look at it. In the late 1780s, there were debtor rebellions. You had Americans picking up guns. Shays' Rebellion was one example. There were other ones in South Carolina and other places. Guys just don't want to go out and kill and get killed by militia and the like. They have to be driven to some desperate measures when this happened. And the desperate measures were debts, and onerous taxes, unfair, unequal taxes, and the like. Then there was the panic of, after the American Revolution, the monetary crises. Then there came the panic of 1792, the panic of 1809 that lasted several years, the depression of 1819, the recession, severe recession, and panic of 1837, and you can go on all through the 19th century. The entire 1890s, the crash, the incredible crash of 1893, where Teddy Roosevelt got up and he said, and I got his quote, he says, "We need a war, any war, just to get the people's minds off of how bad things are here, just distract them to go fight some foreign enemy." It's really very refreshing when they come out and they just say it, When you keep saying to people, this is what was motivating, oh, come on. Then you find a quote, you say, look, this is what he said. Alexander Hamilton said it in one of his Federalist papers, that rulers, when in difficulties and such, will often try to distract their populations from domestic problems by conjuring up international crises and foreign threats. These foreign threats cause the people to do what? Rally around the leader. So they knew what they were doing, and they knew what it was about. And all through the 20th century, wars, recessions, inflation, market crashes, investor panics, Great Depression, massive deficits, bubbles, bailouts, and the like. Hardly a normal year with the free market. It is a system that can never settle with itself, that lives on $500 billion spending on the military budget. You want to talk about stimulus packages? This economy, since 1947 or so, has had a stimulus package every year. It's called the defense budget, and it's bigger than. Yeah, you in Hawaii would know about that, right? I mean, half of Hawaii is preempted by the military, it seems. There's something else. Do I really want to talk about it? Well, why don't you talk among yourselves for a few minutes, and let me just. This is called preparation, right? This I want to use later. Well, now these recessions, by the way, these recessions are not so bad for the big boys. Recessions actually work kind of good, kind of nicely. Recessions tame labor. You have today people lining up for jobs that they wouldn't have dreamed that they would have applied for 4 or 5 years ago. I have friends with college education